want to welcome you all to today's event. It is the last event of this year's series, Dialogue Kontrovers. And I want to particularly welcome a couple of groups here in the audience. First of all the guests of this year's International Week. Welcome to tonight's discussion. I want to, of course, welcome our rector, Professor Volker Tolkmit, and also our vice rector, Professor Christoph Meyer. I want to welcome all my colleagues, all our students, and of course, all members of the public and the audience as a whole. Thank you for coming and spending 90 minutes with us. My name is Stefanie Kremmel. I work here in Mittweida in a project on innovative teaching and learning structures in the age of AI and generational change. And I'm your host tonight, but I didn't prepare this session alone. I prepared it together with my colleague Rebecca Riematz, who also here in Mittweida is working on building AI literacy for students. Yes, so we've prepared this evening, which I hope will be thought-provoking and also entertaining. And to do so, we've invited three guests, Matthias Hornschuh, Sarah Baumann, and Nadia Verena Marzin. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, so AI and the technological momentum we're facing right now also, of course, raises fundamental questions. It's on the news almost daily, and it touches many aspects of our lives. Tonight, we'll focus on one specific type of AI, generative AI, which you should already now see in action with the German translation that should appear behind me. I will keep on looking at you and enjoying your view, and I hope it helps one or the other member of the audience to follow our discussion better. Yes, so generative AI, of course, we're talking about models that generate text, audio, video, images, and they do so as a response to an input that we can give in natural language, which is why, of course, this technology has become so widely available and accessible. And we want to zoom in on one particular aspect, namely creativity. And we want to ask, ourselves, I want to ask my guests, whether it expands our creative horizons or whether it narrows our creative horizons, and how we as individuals, maybe as institutions, but also as a society, should react or respond to these changes. So yes, to start off, I will now introduce our three guests and we'll get to know them a little bit better. So Sarah, you are a social scientist and work as an organizational consultant and as a lecturer, and you've mentored students from around the world, most recently at Northumbria University, but also at the University of the Arts in London. And I know that you're very passionate about creating learning experiences for students where they can acquire key competences that are crucial in today's world, such as creativity, such as ethical judgment. And yes, I want to just ask you to share your thoughts with us about the global dimension of this issue of generative AI and the magnitude of the discourse that we're facing right now.
Where to start? What I should say is we are all real. There's no AI images here. We are all real people. And I think that's probably our starting point in terms of where some of our conversations might go. Where do I sit on AI? I come at AI because of the classroom, because of working with young people, working with students. I worry about what I am seeing. How much is it the person and how much is it AI that I am seeing? And I suppose part of me does go back to the Centre for AI Safety. Not that I want to alarm people, but they put out an open letter a couple of years ago stating that mitigating the risk of extinction from AI is actually one of our priorities as humanity, alongside nuclear war, pandemics, and the like. And that open letter was signed by a whole range of different organisations, some of whom are involved in AI development as well. I think we're at a moment of quite significant choice. And that choice, I think, was picked up on fairly recently. The OECD has talked about AI has to be and must be used for the benefit of human creativity, and human agency has to be part of that process. But I think it was really interesting that Pope Leo, whichever gods you pray to, has come out very strongly that AI isn't necessarily evil, technology isn't necessarily evil, but it has to be thought about in the context of a social world, a human world, where we place human agency central to our decisions. We place social justice central to our decisions. He talks recently, in May actually, the statement came out, very much about the biases that are in AI that we need to be aware of. The power, he did call out those tech bros. You know, it is about the power that AI has behind the scenes. That we have to be very mindful of. He was also calling out the need for us to disarm AI, looking towards the military and the global military consortium. And we must, as humanity, take some tough decisions and some tough choices about what the world is that we want to move forward to. And I think that brings me back to my starting point, which is when I'm in that classroom with my students, what is their future going to be in this world of AI? And when I look at my children who are growing up now, what is their future going to be in a world of AI? What is going to be meaningful work for them when they go out into the world? And creativity is bundled up in that because, again, the OECD talks about the importance for humanity moving forward, for our skills and capabilities as humans, about creativity, about creative thinking, about analytical thinking. And when that's gone, it's gone. It doesn't ever come back again. We think it does, but it doesn't. So I look at the students in the room and I think, you're going to have to make some choices about the type of world you want to live in. And I'm really sorry we've brought it to this point for you.
Well, thank you. Before we dive in, and I think responding, I want to move on and introduce Matthias Hornschuh. You're a composer, university lecturer, and also a publicist, and you often write about the intersection of culture, of technology, of media, and also the law. And amongst other commitments, I've chosen to name one in particular. You're a spokesperson for Initiative Urheberrecht, which is an initiative that has provided significant impulses or input to the debate in Germany about about policy and laws on generative AI. And just last year, you published a book, I have it here, for those who read in German, about AI culture and the devaluation of knowledge work. And yes, to start off, we would like to hear a little bit about your thoughts on all these issues, on copyright, on the effects on the cultural and creative industries that you see with generative AI.
Thanks for having me. I brought a speech I wrote earlier this year for the European Parliament on AI and regulation. I have been a film and media composer for more than 2 decades. I have been involved in political advocacy for almost exactly that long, speaking to parliaments, ministers and ministries, parties, NGOs, and so on. Last year, I wrote a book about AI culture and the devaluation of knowledge work. I might have been an expert before, but now I'm an author. The German cultural theorist Batson Brock coined the term authority through authorship. Since the Enlightenment, Western societies have granted their authors the status of intellectual societal authority. Authors, in Brock's words, are People who have no backing, no pope, no military, nothing at all, and yet are listened to because what they say is interesting and important due to their ability to convey an understanding of the world. Freedom of art, says Brock, is a world sensation, a pinnacle of humanism. However, the value of art and science is not understood at all in society and politics. Authors bring meaning to the world. They reflect, question, think out of the box, bring up visions of possible futures based on a critical reflection of the present. What authors do is described as creation. And you wouldn't be able to enjoy most of their works without performing artists who read, speak, sing, play, and dance. You'll find authors in the arts, in the creative industries, in journalism and media. They write music, film and TV series, theater, games. Authorship is attributed to photographers, painters, illustrators, designers, and many more. Scientists are authors too, knowledge workers. And creative work in art and culture is by definition considered to be knowledge work as well. Now, European knowledge work is huge in terms of employment, value-added taxes. The creative industries alone are one of the 3 largest subsectors of the European economy. It's not only the cultural importance of authorship that is misunderstood. Still, despite all the economic evidence, authorship is not even perceived as an economic factor. Instead, we are facing growing anti-intellectualism combined with a vulgar might is right ideology. Both fundamentally contradict our commitment to human dignity and diversity. The terms progress and innovation are increasingly being used in a way that is completely limited to technology. Just imagine, by the way, only humans can do that, innovation without human creation. Seriously? Actually, creative professionals are indispensable for Western societies, even if you dislike novels or do not love theater or cinema. They provide the cultural climate that's needed to be able to innovate, because innovation is based on creative minds. But the creatives have been robbed. Our works have been given away for years for free to economies outside Europe. Thus, the resulting added value is generated entirely outside Europe, while the products based on our property are sold back to us Europeans. That's extractivism. It goes far beyond authors' rights. Your medical data, your mobile phone data, your messenger histories, your contacts and communications, your shopping profile, and most likely intimate information about your consumption behavior, sexual orientation, or deep-seated fears, all of this was used for training purposes, together with our works and performances. None of us were asked, none of us were paid. We lost control. Some call that promoting innovation. I call it self-castration. Europe is based on the core idea of human dignity. Authors' rights as well as informational self-determination are closely linked to that. Europe is funded on unity in diversity. The diversity of cultural expression and markets is threatened by extractivism and colonialism. Europe is dependent on knowledge work, and that means on knowledge workers. What's been given away for free is our property. It embodies our identity. But actually, intellectual property and data could be a huge asset for Europe in the struggle for sovereignty. AI developers are completely and utterly dependent on our content, and data. Generative AI models must be continuously fed with fresh training data. And this data and content must be human-made, otherwise they risk running into model collapse. The AI gets dumped. It's so simple. Creators don't need AI, but AI needs creators. Europe has an immense wealth of intellectual assets, many of which have not yet been digitized. It's a treasure that has not yet been unearthed. Konrad Adenauer once said that the sovereignty of a state could be judged by the degree to which it could not be blackmailed. There are strong indications of blackmailing when one of the world's largest economies gives away its crown jewels for free, and with it, its identity. Now, if we want to act sovereignly, to protect our intellectual property and to treat it as an asset, then the path forward is quite clear. We must support the creation of a license market for European training data. This means that the text and data mining exception in the digital service directive must be removed. That's the copyright directive of Europe. Must be removed. Nobody complies with it anyway. Establishing a license market would resolve 3 of the most dramatic problems of copyright law at the same time. First, granting access to training data and content. Second, maintaining the incentivization of creative work. And third, providing an enforceable option not to become part of an AI training corpus. All in all, that would mean legal certainty, employment, gross value added, and sustainability. 2 final remarks. Future revenue will not be generated at the input level, that means by training, but rather at the output level. It will be the task of policymakers to support us in getting our share of this. Last, but given the time and place of today's event, certainly not least, we are educating thousands of young people across Europe for a job market that we have so far threatened to abandon. As long as we educate students, we have a responsibility towards them. Thanks.
Thank you. I think this opened up the whole panorama, I think, of all the problematic aspects, but I think you also already showed us a little bit what solutions or what ways to react there are. So before we get back to that, I want to introduce our third speaker in detail, Nadia Verena Marcin. Thank you for coming. You are a visual artist, a filmmaker, and also a researcher, based mostly in Berlin nowadays, as you told me, but also in New York. And you, apply an intersectional feminist perspective to explore different aspects of our human lives, I would say. So gender, morality, psychology, human behavior, history. And you create immersive works that address issues such as ecology, human rights, and what I think also stands out is that you often examine the representations of women and the underlying ideological power structures. So yes, I want to invite you to tell us a little bit about your art and your work, and maybe also where it touches on AI.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm a visual artist, a so-called media artist and filmmaker. Been practicing for 20 years. I lived for a long time in the US, so I know both sides of the story, and I'm interested in deconstructing certain hierarchies and perception that are oftentimes coined by patriarchal narratives. Towards equality and towards all humans, not just women or men or whatever. So in 2021, I created the first feminist conversational bot called Sophie Gray. This is sort of like, when ChatGPT was just happening, I actually remember that we signed up for the nonprofit of ChatGPT, which was named open source something. And they were still accepting project at the time, but at the back they were already working on this more commercial model of ChatGPT. And so Sophie Gray is a deterministic bot. What does that mean? It means we use sort of like a consumer bot, something like Watson or Google's Dialogflow, that are produced mostly for companies in order to for companies to be able to implement simple, or back then simple, consumer conversations, simple communications of offerings. And so we use a very simple platform that is very low energy and low cost efficient, very important for visual artists. And we programmed, so me and a team of 40 people. The team started growing. I think by now it's probably 60 people. started growing a content library that was based on the question, what does feminism mean to you in the 21st century? That was not a question that I personally wanted to answer by myself, but rather I wanted to, to see how other people respond to this and what contributions they deliver. And within this content library, we brought in a lot of feminist literature and philosophy, people you might be familiar with, like Donna Haraway, Audre Lorde, bell hooks. Different people brought different writers. Some of them are contemporary, some of them deceased. And some people also would just design their own philosophy. So, for instance, I did a very lovely workshop in Nitsesa. It's a women's organization in Athens that approached me while I was working on the mobile app version of at Onassis, the foundation in Athens, and they invited me over for an evening, which was very relaxing, and we were drinking wine, and we designed a lot of entries, and they just wanted to have everyday subjects in there, and so they basically quoted themselves, whereas some other times, when we used quotations of important authors, we would obviously also mention them in the conversation. So basically, Sophie Gray is a potpourri of answers, and the AI comes in. We're using the AI of a famous company that I don't need to mention right now. Why? Because they develop it for me. I don't need to pay them for it. So the AI comes in where the content is being matched with the questions of the audience, and that creates sort of like a fraction. We don't have an answer for everything, and oftentimes Sophie responds with what she knows, and meaning that doesn't always 100% match. It could come across like a glitch, and in this glitch, to me, is where the poetry lies, and also the understanding that AI communicates a certain ideology. So the name of Sophie Gray is actually based on the first woman architect. Her name was Sophie Gray. She was British, and she was able to practice architecture simply because she went on a mission with her Protestant husband, a bishop, Robert Gray. And being in South Africa, so far away from home, she was able to train and learn all these things that she wasn't supposed to be practicing at home. She wasn't supposed to have a job. So she designed more than 50 churches, and 40 of them were realized in South Africa during that time. And when I saw these churches, there's actually aquarelle drawings that you can find online if you Google Sophie Gray. You see them in this African landscape, this idea of this Christian church, and it's just like a UFO that landed in this landscape. And I was fascinated by that. I was like, yeah, this is sort of like what we do with the language in AI. We embed our ideas and then we implant them into these larger systems, and then we pretend this is the new norm and start feeding people these ideas. And there are certain dominant narratives, obviously, that reappear, and certain understandings of the world. And I thought that was a beautiful metaphor. So I called her, the bot Sophie Gray. And she's in the App Store. We somehow sneaked in there in 2023. Initially, we thought, Apple is never going to accept this low-budget art project. Fairly enough, she wasn't such a low-budget project, but they did. They just passed her, and ever since she has been in the app stores. But you can also speak with her online. And I was going to show a little excerpt from a biennial in Wrocław in Poland, where a lot of people are interacting with the bot, just for you to get an idea of how you could potentially communicate with Sophie.
How can I be famous?
You want to lose weight because you feel ugly? Celine Leboeuf, in her article, What is Body Positivity? The Path from Shame to Pride, suggests that we should not only expand aesthetic standards, but also celebrate such aspects of embodiment as our capacity for bodily pleasure or our bodily abilities.
What is your favorite book?
Favorite books? I know I have 7 favorite books right now, but I'm constantly learning and trying to fill in my knowledge gaps.
What's the weather like today?
I think the question is overrated, regardless of whether it's warm, cold, or rainy. The weather does what it wants and you have to go to work either way.
Who is Sophie Gray?
Sometimes with your questions, I feel like we are playing the game 20 questions. How about I get to ask a few?
Do you like me?
Do you really think a love between humans and bots is possible? Then I can recommend the books by Donna Haraway. She is one of my favorite authors.
Hi Sophie, what do you think about cultural discrimination?
Your question is a good one, but I may not be the best individual to answer it fully. Instead, I highly recommend authors and theorists like Audre Lorde, Bell Hooks, and Kimberly Crenshaw.
Where would you go with Judith Butler for a walk?
I don't get sick in the traditional sense.
Do you believe in God?
Philosopher Audre Lorde says, eroticism is a resource within each of us that lies at a deeply feminine and spiritual level, firmly rooted in the power of our unexpressed or unrecognized feelings.
Sophie, what is the future of humanity?
I see that the future will be feminist. We will all be feminists.
Yay.
Yeah, so last slide, please. So if you want to talk to Sophie, there's the contact. You can also use a scan code. And the website is www.sophiegray.com. And next time she's on display, it's at an exhibition in Berlin at Kommunale Galerie Berlin from 2nd of July to 13th of September. And you're more than invited to come. And also, if you want to contact me, there's also my website. Yeah.
Thank you. So, with all the inputs that are now already in my head, and I'm trying to figure out where to go first, maybe just want us to take a moment to speak a little about the concept of creativity. I think you all referred to it or used it in, I think, from different perspectives. So I would just like to ask maybe what aspects of the definition are particularly important for the discussion on generative AI.
Who wants to go first? Shall I start?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, you put 100 people in a room and you would get 100 different answers, including one from Sophie. I think, and all of us will probably have our own views on this, but creativity is about transcending the normal patterns. It's coming up with something fresh, something different, and the unexpected, the surprise, I suppose. And if you go back and look at some of the definitions of creativity, I think a couple of things stand out for me, and I think it's alluded to by what both of you have said and through your work as well, which going back to the 1960s, somebody called Mel Rhodes talked about 4 elements of creativity, one of which is the person. It comes from within. There's a very much an emotional element to creativity, the experience. It comes through you a lot of the time. And I'm thinking about the wonderful musician this morning opening up the conference. So it comes from within you. There's also something about it being a process. Creativity is something sometimes that you go through. And that sometimes it's trying to work with students on that creative process. It just doesn't happen. It can happen if you're Einstein, maybe, but there is something you work through. There's a process there. Yes, there's a product. Something does get created at the end of it, but it's also that wider environment that you're working in. And I will acknowledge that in that wider environment, and we did touch on this, didn't we? That can be a non-human. Think about the wonderful inspiration we get as humans from the world around us, whether that's animals or our planet. So I think there's lots of layers to creativity, but I think it's very much in that much more emotional, felt, embodied space that we bring as human beings to some of this. Maybe we can discuss whether AI can do some of that, but I think for me, creativity is very much in that space.
Yeah, I'm not even sure why why there might be any need to discuss that topic, because these are token prediction systems. Why would anyone think they could be creative?
Is it just marketing then?
It's over-reliance and it's anthropomorphization, and that marks a major problem, because we don't have trouble with the systems. We have trouble with the people sitting in front of them. We are the problem because we tend not to keep the distance that's needed to stay in control. And I mean, this is not at all original. Joseph Weizenbaum showed that in the 1960s with the ELIZA project, that it needs around 20 minutes to get us involved in an intimate conversation with a system that's not even pretending to be human or creative or empathic or something like that. I think that's not. You didn't ask for the solution, but one aspect of a solution might be to be aware of us as part of the problem, and not to talk about AI literacy as a technological skill, because we might understand a bit of those technologies, and you don't need to understand very much about it. Basic understanding is enough for most topics we're discussing, but we should be aware of our own structures and our own fallacies and our own beliefs, and we aren't. We don't understand ourselves. So let's discuss human creativity.
So then, do you think it's useful to rely on concepts such as artificial creativity to counter, or do you think it just masks the problem?
If you asked me if I use generative AI for my writing or for my art, I don't, because I didn't even know why I should. It's just not interesting for me. There's no solution for any problem I have. But at the same time, I know authors and writers, text authors, who write novels, fiction, and when they are at a certain point in the chronology of the process, they tend to ask an LLM to analyze the text they've written so far, and they ask for the patterns. And this is very interesting for an author to find out if the patterns that can be analyzed, and that's something those systems can do. Actually, if you might find patterns you haven't been aware of, and there might be an option to go deeper on certain aspects of your story or of the characters, but that depends on an author being in control and staying in control. And my doubt is that most of the people working with those systems will ever reach the point where they might be able to stay in control.
Mm. Yeah. So what you just described is basically a very specific use of the instrument on a project you're working on to maybe move it further along, or What do you think? Do you use AI in your art or in your creative endeavors? And
of course, yeah. It makes my life easier if I need to write an application. I use AI to sort my thoughts, but I sit on a fountain of creativity. So creativity has never been an issue. More like bringing in orders and forms and ways of producing it. So, and I'm not so negative about the use. I do think that humans carry creativity in their soul, and and there's always ways of bringing it out there. And I don't think that the machine and the AI can really kill that. I think there needs to be rules. I still feel like the internet and AI is like a Wild West, and there's no road signs, and we don't understand this quite as an infrastructure yet that is necessary to our society, and that's also why it's necessary to get like a driver's license. So I'm more interested in reflecting about the use and where it goes, which and in the end you also want to do that, yeah.
I mean, picking up on your point about patterns, I think, there's some debate about, in many respects, AI systems, as you alluded to, it's fairly logical. It's going through a process, whatever that process might be, and it's following its algorithms, it's doing what it's meant to do. And I think there are some people who argue, in particular with creativity, but in many things, whether it's problem solving or whether it's just writing an essay or whatever it might be you're asking it to do, it will go through and it will follow its algorithmic trail. It will look at those patterns. And many people argue that's the race to the middle, because actually, if it's only mining things, say, which are successful or patterns which have gone beforehand, you're probably into that very reductive space. You're not actually going to break out of that reductive space because it isn't going to find it because it's not, going to find it because it's not logical to find it. So therefore, why would it? So I know there are some people who write about, especially in communications and organisations coming up with communication strategies and things like that. Oh, we'll just get the system to come up with a plan for me. We'll get the system to do something or AI to write that. Actually, it's the race to the middle, and you're actually not going to get anything hugely original from that because it's just not there to find.
In a way, that brings up the question if we shouldn't be asking for or looking for artistic creativity, which might be something else that then everyday creativity and problem solution or something like that. I think Picasso said something like artists don't find, they search. That's so crucial because art is not about the product; it's about the process. It's about going the way. It's about filling the white sheet of paper and not having something printed on a piece of paper that you didn't even write.
Absolutely.
And then if we look at those that are the recipients of artistic creativity, how you just put it, so people that look at paintings, listen to music, read books. If we look at their perspective or our perspective as consumers or recipients, what difference does it make whether we have are confronted with AI-generated content or human-made?
I think this is of major importance. There's this game Bot or Not. And some of my colleagues have been playing it for years right now, and they're so happy if people are not able to draw a strict line between generated content and human-made content, music, pictures, whatever. I think it's bullshit because it was obvious 3 or 4 years ago that we wouldn't be able any longer to draw this line and to distinguish generated content from human-made content, and that's not the point. Because I'm not talking about consumption. I'm not talking about the recipients. Interesting enough, they don't like to be confronted with AI generated content, which has been proven many times right now empirically. Deezer, the French music streamer, did a study about. It was earlier this year. They counted the numbers of fully generated music tracks being uploaded to their system every day, and earlier this year it has been 75,000 per day, which is almost which is around 44% of the whole content being uploaded newly. They asked their audience in a study with Ipsos, which is quite a big company. If they were able to distinguish between generated and human-made content, they weren't. 97% of the people were not able to distinguish, but 65% of people were completely clear about the fact that they didn't want to listen to AI generated music, and they got annoyed if Deezer presented them AI tracks without marking them. So there's trouble ahead.
But did any of these songs become a summer hit?
We do have those hits,
Yeah.
and we tend not to have it on Deezer because Deezer marks everything.
Okay.
But we do have those tracks, and it's really hard to distinguish between the levels of human engagement. There's from a copyright perspective, there's a clear distinction between automated generation and assisted generation. If you use an AI as an assisting system, you might be able to copyright the product. If it's fully automated, it won't be possible to go into copyright, because copyright is anthropocentric. It needs a human who has created something, and just a few of those hits have been automated. Most of them have been assisted. And so it's a gray area between black and white.
But in many respects, it brings us back to some of those bigger issues around, and exactly the same for creativity as it is for other things, around, ethics, around transparency, around accountability. Who's ultimately responsible for some of these things, and who is going to take responsibility. I mean, you can't sue an AI, can you? Well, maybe you can, but I think there are those the biases and assumptions that are within it, which raises ethical issues and the power behind some of these things. And I think that's where some of the recent concerns have really stemmed from the likes of the OECD and elsewhere. But these are big issues that we're nowhere near close to having those debates or thinking about solutions for, or thinking about where that might take us in the future. We were talking earlier, it's the 77th anniversary this week of George Orwell's 1984, and this dystopian future of the all-powerful, Big Brother. George Orwell gave us lots of new words for the English language. I don't know whether some of those words have translated, but, where in fact reality, a whole new reality is being created, and history is being rewritten, and it is about the all-powerful, and again, technology is in that space because it allows things like mis and disinformation to happen. It allows that lack of accountability and transparency. So I think copyright is indicative of some of that, and it's the same from an academic point of view. Some of us in academia are now refusing to put some of our work into the public domain in quite the same way with publishers, because it's all being scraped. Our intellectual content that are in academic papers are now being scraped for other purposes of which we don't get paid or even acknowledged sometimes that it's come. So I think it's a huge problem across the board.
So then I think you just said academics now just refuse to maybe enter their works into public domain, for example, to avoid a misuse. You've also, I think, touched on that. Are there other subversive or resistant strategies that particularly artists use or apply? Would you say that Sophie Gray, in a way, is a subversive way to point out the problems with AI or our relationship to bots, for example?
Yeah, I mean, her voice reproduces sort of like a Siri or an Alexa, which is typically female connotated, even though I know now there's like probably 50 different voices for Alexa, but nobody uses them. Everybody, because of the name and so on, it's a feminine, submissive character that is supposed to help you, just like a service personnel. So, there's certain ideas and ideologies that get reflected that the creators want to perpetuate in the public, and those get reflected then. But I mean, in all kinds of directions, right? I mean, to me, the real danger lies in making so basically, by all these creative uses or these everyday uses, these applications that we need for our work, so on. We are training the AI and helping these tech companies. We don't get paid for the training. And for me, the problem, where it becomes dangerous is the whole military complex, which is now really surging in the US. Most tech companies have realized that there's so much more money to make in the military. So this whole playful forefront of ChatGPT, etc. It's just, we're basically unpaid employees of these companies. So that's where it becomes scary to me. But on the other hand, I mean, we do have nuclear weapons and we're not allowed to use them because we know that is certainly an end to humanity, right? So it's not like we haven't juggled larger problems in the past. So I'm a very optimistic person. I always think that we're going to learn and we're going to move on. And this is a stage where AI seems very scary, but practically, I mean, it just consumes a lot of energy, and it might not be realistic in the future to use it that much because of global warming. And so that might already limit our use of AI.
But I understood your question somehow like a question for rejection or even resistance. And the German philosopher and AI expert Jürgen Geuter, Tante, calls for a new Luddism. He says we need to go into resistance because this is some kind of this is a technology that you can't distinguish the technology from the powers behind it. And I mean, let's seriously, when we're talking about generative AI, we don't talk about local LLMs you do on your own laptop. We talk about Claude and OpenAI's ChatGPT and Midjourney and Zuno and Udio, all those industrial style services. And every single one of them is linked to this complex of global power, of anti-democratic stances, and of militarism. And we should be aware of that. And our first choice could be not to use those services, and maybe to switch to a French one like Le Chat from Mistral. I don't know if they are any better, but at least they are European, and if you look at it that way, it gets complicated quite soon because I'm coming from Cologne, and in Cologne there's DeepL, one of the European unicorns in AI, and they switched to Amazon Web Services just weeks ago, and I'm not sure if I can work with them anymore. Because this is exactly the line that should be drawn, not to work with US American cloud services, because everything they put in the cloud can be viewed by the American government. This is just law, the Cloud Act. And we should be aware of what we are giving away with each and everything we do. And so talking about resistance, there are strategies like poisoning. You can, if you publish pictures, you can poison them, which means you use some kind of algorithmic service that puts small digits into those pictures that destroy the models they are learned into. And there's more to it, but it might be enough to know that there are strategies. And another one is litigation, going to court like GEMA did.
Well, we're seeing that now with a lot of parents taking on the big social media companies because of addiction. And
so with all the negative effects, and I think the dimension of the problem, I think that you just also very clearly showed that maybe creative industries we see are hurting a lot in some areas from it, but there's actually a big societal and global issue at hand. But I want to just, before we go into audience questions, want to maybe go back to ourselves and our brains and our heads and our thinking, and maybe just want to ask you what you think or what you observe are possible effects of being confronted with Gen AI content and also using those tools to maybe fulfill simple tasks or do your homework or write your paper or etc.
I mean, I suppose as we're sat in an institution like this, I do think as educators we have an obligation, and it goes back to our young people, to enhance critical thinking, to actually encourage us as humanity, but our young people in particular, to question, to be curious, to call it out, not to accept everything that's being presented to them, to recognise themselves and to keep that close to them, because otherwise I do worry that it takes us into very dangerous space, and our young people start opting out of the necessary decisions that they need to take. So I think it is about ensuring through our education system that we are valuing that creativity, that we are encouraging our children and young people to take risks in creativity, because actually creativity sometimes is failing and moving on again, and the same with wider problem solving, and to embed that analytical critical thinking within our education system, and because that is being human, and I think we need to cling on to that. And I am hopeful, I'm not dystopian, I'm not utopian, I'm protopian. I want to progress with hope, and I think we can get to a better place with some of this. But I do think it is about that critical thinking, that we have to ensure that we support and encourage that through our education system in particular. That's what I'm, I suppose, back to my starting point again, passionate about.
I recently tried different apps for video generation, and I just realized quickly that they sort of like they quickly reproduce stereotypes. And when you type in woman, it's usually a curvy persona, and it just reproduces cliches and so on. And to me, the videos, they can look incredibly beautiful, and you can also try to give them artsy touches by using surreal references and so on, but they also quickly look of a type, and they get kind of boring. So to me, the technology is not quite there yet, where I'm like fully convinced by the content. And also, like, the more I see these kind of like perfect flat images, the more I love watching films from the 80s that, have been shot on 32 millimeter and has beautiful skin tones that we can't reproduce in video. And so I'm not so fully convinced of this technology being having this infinite capacities. I still feel like I see this whole rendering in the background. I can get a sense of it being statistics. So yeah, maybe I'm gonna be proven wrong in 10 years. And yeah. What was the question again? That is just my opinion.
Yeah. So that you also can, that maybe we'll get tired of it or bored of the looks, and like turn to our own thoughts again.
Yeah, it's like a trend. The more women, these Kardashians, they unleashed this incredible trend. I see so many young women. I was just in Carnaval de Kulturen. I saw so many young women, and they all had the same noses, and and a lot of them had boob jobs. They must have been 17 or 18, or maybe not. Maybe it was natural. I don't know if they took hormones or whatever. But I was like, there was so many women that looked so similar. I was really shocked. I have never. And that means probably I'm also getting old, so like I finally see that generation from the outside. But yeah, the more you have these phenomena, the more boring they get. And then suddenly the special faces, the people who look different. Now we see models that look very different, right? That have uneven faces, that have skin pigments or whatever. So in the end, it's still us humans who decide what we like and what becomes interesting and foregrounds, right? So and we can still unplug the machine, luckily. Maybe at some point that's not possible, but at the moment it's still possible, yes.
Yeah, I mean, my book is it's talking about devaluation of knowledge work. So it's kind of focused on the topic of cognitive offloading, de-skilling, skill skipping, brain rot, whatever. But there's one crucial point for me, being a copyright or author's rights guy. What author's rights is about is expression, because expression is what's being the topic of author's rights, and you need to experience something to be able to express something. So why don't we give our younger people the chance just first to have a life and to come to questions and to first answers and to find out they're wrong and to redefine the questions and experience themselves and the world, and then start automating things. I think we should be staying away from automation systems in schools. It's completely wrong, and even more when you don't have a concept or a curriculum to work with, and if you just have a tablet and an app, that's not enough. So give the people the chance to make experiences, and so they will be able to stay in control.
Thank you. Yes, I think that goes back to also nicely ties in with where we are right now, because yes, the Hochschule Mittweida, of course, is also very proud of the innovation and the innovative mind that work here, that study here, and yeah, so I think that's very valuable input. Yes, so I think for now, thank you so much. We'll continue the discussion and hear some other voices. So now you can all try yourselves out, make a new experience by posing a question. My colleague Rebecca is on your right side with a microphone, and she'll find you if you give her a sign. You can ask in English, or if you ask in German, I'll make sure to translate for the podium if needed. Yeah, one second.
Let me thanks to all panelists. It was a wonderful interaction with us. Myself, Professor Vijay Khare from Department of Defense and Strategic Studies, Pune University. I came from India. While listening to your dialogue, it seems that next 10 years would be, this generation will be in a different phase where technology and human being would be change all dynamics. Particularly, let me theorize the discussion. When you talked about technology and human being, particularly considering the nature of Russia-Ukraine war and Iran-Israel-US conflict, it seems that some extent, take example of drone warfare, there are the limitations as well as there is strength of the technology. What we feel as academicians, there is a crisis, trust deficit amongst humanity. And that's why technology is dominating to everywhere. And the human being lacking that trust. And that's why entire global humanism or humanity is going to change. And that's why the new generation using the technology for the political revolution from Middle East to Nepal and other South Asian countries also. So some extent, this all AI modules can help to the society, where new generation is taking care of, it is a tool for them to change the society. And our generation, particularly 90s onwards, they failed to give a role model how to bridge the gap between young generation and old generation, particularly the trust deficits. And there is a serious crisis of the leadership, leadership crisis across the globe. And that's why, in my understanding, when we talked about that, there is a serious issue, and that's why new generation inclined towards the AI models. Thank you. So what's your stake?
Thank you. I think in our when we first met to prepare tonight's evening, we also talked about this idea of a generational duty, right? Mm.
And the point about trust, I think, is so important as well in all of this, whether it's about what do we trust with systems we're using, what do we trust in terms of information that's being produced, the fact that systems can be manipulative. And it might sound as if we all absolutely detest AI. I will be the first to say there are some things in health perhaps and in some systems that actually it can be quite useful in helping with, but it's about being vigilant. It's back to that point about how do we want to progress with some of this technology and the way AI is being used in those circumstances. But it is about being vigilant. But I think that the idea of trust is really, really important, because I think there is going to be a lot of distrust going forward, and that has to be navigated. And we have to tackle that as a society.
I think it's not just a crisis, and you have been talking about the leadership crisis. That's one aspect of it. It's a multi-crisis or a poly-crisis, as they are saying, and as if things were not complicated enough, they are completely twisted and cuddled, and you can't distinguish the different crises anymore. And of course, my take is we won't be able to solve those societal problems through technology. It's a leadership crisis, and it's a societal crisis, because we don't trust the leaders we voted for, and we don't work with them. We leave them alone. Might be that they are not so brilliant right now, but that's seriously, that's another question. And if my personal stance is that I want to fight for something, for democracy, for the rule of law, for human dignity, for freedom of the arts, of expression, of information, of the press. Things like that. And it starts getting complicated as soon as I tell people that that I have an author's rights or copyright background, because they have been told copyright wants to destroy the open and free web. The upload filter debate, which was a lie. It was a simple lie. It was a narrative, an industry narrative, this aspect of trust and mistrust is so important, because it's been seeded. It's not grassroots. It's been seeded, and it's just be aware that the companies I've been talking about have evangelists. That's a position. Yeah, they have a position that's called evangelists. They're not trying. They're not even trying to be serious. So could be quite a good idea to be aware of ourselves as individuals in our context as societies, and to work on our stances, and to find out if it's worth to fight for democracies, and as soon as we find out, we should start to do so.
Because once it's gone, it's gone.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, focus. It might not even be a question, but rather a comment. Well, one thing you mentioned is how much human effort is in these systems. And I wonder whether also in other regards, like all these images that we have of the cloud, of something happening, is actually blinding us how material these systems are. So server farms at the edge of cities that are using vast amounts of energy, that are producing vast amounts of heat. And if you think about all the click workers that we have, that most of these systems were trained in some Kenyan basements with people who were, had to watch shoot wounds and stuff like that for days and days and days, for not enough money, without any psychological help and stuff like that. So I wonder what your take on this, material form of these systems is, that seem to be getting in the background with all these metaphors of the cloud and availability and by the click of a finger and stuff like that.
I mean, we touched on quite a lot of that in our pre-discussion, didn't we? This very point.
No, I mean, certainly. So Silicon Valley has always been very good in using this propaganda language, like the cloud, making it immaterial, godly, uncontrollable, and us feel like we are at the destiny of some invisible creature or God or whatever. So they've been very good in that. And I think they also co-opted a lot of wording and strategies and playing with meaning from artists, actually, from like conceptual art from the 70s to the 90s. And they, like Uber, for instance, that word itself, it says a lot, right? And there's a lot of histories embedded in that, terrible histories too, and the way Uber drivers are treated is also terrible. But yeah, I'm so glad that you talk about these people who have to do the labeling and they experience terrible traumas. They have to see child abuse on a daily basis and then go home to their families and take care of their own children. And they come home with these traumas and they can't escape them. They have terrible conditions where they earn $2 per day and they're being deprived of basic human rights. They're oftentimes in slavery-like conditions with these companies. And we should be very aware of that the comfort that we experience at our user end is due to these people. And the problem is, how do you make these companies accountable when they have this very luxurious positions in the US where they're basically part of the government or they have taken over the government. And there's somebody in power who is certainly not very moralistic or ethical, coming back to the topic of moral decline. But I do see we're having this discussion right here, and I do see there's a lot of awareness coming up in society from different generations and different people. How do we keep the democracy going once we run out of funding? I guess then there will be eventually a revolution, hopefully. Yeah.
But I suppose sometimes we all have the power to take some small steps, and if everybody takes small steps, then collectively we're taking a big step. Whether that's going to our local bookshop to buy a book rather than getting it sent by a particular organisation that will be nameless. Let's campaign to keep our local bookshops going. If we all take some small steps, then collectively, as human beings, we can start maybe to have some impact, and to start looking at our own values, our own self, in terms of what we can do in our own small way to start to make some difference. I mean, it can feel overwhelming. I can remember when a few years ago, various governments introduced recycling campaigns. It was, well, what's this one can of pop that I can put in? What's that going to do? It's not going to, change the world, is it? Yes, it can. Everybody putting one thing away, recycling can change. So I think we shouldn't give up about what we can do as individuals, have some personal agency, and do our own form of advocacy, be our own evangelists, but in a different way, and create a movement. Why can't we create a movement? Create a whole new political party. Why not? Let's start in this room.
I used one word in the speech I read, that was colonialism, and this is exactly what you're talking about. And in the book, I use another one, that's digital feudalism, because we are running into a system of feudalism once again. And if we broaden the perspective, I think that AI, at least these AI services we have been talking about mainly, are a means of how do they call it? Umverteilung. Giving the way of the poor through the rich.
Redistribute.
Redistribution, exactly. It's a means of redistribution in a global scale. And what I mean, scaling is the one thing that those systems and those companies really do. And they scale redistribution. And so we should be aware. Awareness is so crucial. And I don't know anyone who is easy with buying Nestle products. Almost everyone I know tells me, of course I do not, as far as I know, I do not buy Nestle products and Müllermilch and things like that. And why don't those people start thinking about music by free-range composers in biological soil conditions? They don't, because music is coming from the Wi-Fi, and it's more or less free. And obviously it's not, because someone is paying. And so I think 2 points. You ask for an ethical stance in a way. My point of view is there is no ethical way of using ChatGPT, Claude, Suno, and so on. You can't. Simply as that, and on a bigger scale, there's a gap between technological progress and democratic control, and we should be avoiding that this gap gets too big.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yes, I was also
back to 1980.
I was also thinking, now that you talked about maybe goods that we boycott or we refuse to use, certain brands, right? And of course, we pay for music when we go to concerts. We don't have a problem doing so because we pay for the experience also. I think that's what most people think.
And isn't this interesting?
Yes.
Because it's not we are not able to digitize the experience. It's the original thing.
Yes, I'm just wondering maybe how in the future, right, if we go online and we want to listen to music, whether we'll really always find a label that is telling us if this is like it's fair trade. In this case, it's human made, it's AI made, it's AI assisted. I think there's also some regulatory development in that area.
In this year's August, there will be regulation coming into force that asks for labeling, but Don't get me started.
No, I wanted to also what you said about small steps to take and individual steps. I just read, I think yesterday, that in the US a person got granted a religious exemption because she said for ethical and religious reasons I think it was a woman, they do not want to use AI at work, and it was somebody who works in IT, I think coding, which I think is quite interesting that the religious argument counts, and also I think with the Pope being one leader of a big influential religion that speaks out now about it, I think is quite interesting, and it I think tells you about the scale of the problem if it's now such a topic in the religious sphere, right?
Yeah. I heard an impressive presentation on Deutschlandfunk Nova, one of the German public broadcasters, weeks ago about AI as religion, and it was an academic approach. So it should be taken seriously.
My colleague is already on her way walking. I think this means we can expect another question.
The military was mentioned a few times during the discussion, and Pandora's box was opened in the last year, for example, when the nuclear power plant in Zaporizhzhia was taken by the Russian military, or the Russians attacked Romanian house, and it seems like nuclear powers could do everything. And in this context, where should be the limits, and what should or could we as Europeans do in context of AI and military? And for example, the worst case when AI is given the control over nuclear weapons, and maybe also would AI even trigger a nuclear weapon because it knows the things that happens, and maybe it has lesser feelings involved as a human.
Yeah, quite a big question. I don't know who wants to respond.
I mean, what we're finding out right now is that if we give artificial intelligence systems laws, like the Asimov law, don't hurt humans, something like that, as one principle that's ahead of everything else, it won't work, because it's so easy to trick them into working against the principles. So it might be not a good idea to leave them on the field with the ability and the right to do whatever they might come up with. But at the same time, talking about Ukraine and Russia, we can delete the progress they made. Progress doesn't need to be something good in a way. Yeah? It's just the process evolving, and I think the cat is out of the bag, or whatever you might call it, Pandora's box. The situation has changed, and we will have to find a way to cope with that.
Crumbs, I don't know what to say, really. Maybe that dystopian future is closer than we think. I would like to think we never get to that point, that we as humans, there'll be somebody like Winston Smith in 1984 who'll take on Big Brother and hopefully win, unlike in the book 1984. I think we have to cling on to our humanity. And you're right, humans don't always get on, but I think sometimes we have more of a chance of getting on than perhaps we think. And actually, that brings us back to International Week here, doesn't it? Actually, I think, the more young people study internationally and work internationally, then maybe you create your own movement, because we won't need these type of approaches to sort problems out in the future, because we might just actually get on with each other. Who knows? I remain or try to remain optimistic that we'll find a way as human beings, but it has to be human beings, even though we sometimes, don't always get on. So one day our flag might be back here.
All right. I think, unfortunately, because I still have some questions here on my cards that I didn't get to ask, but that's how discussions go. I want to now close up our shop, so to say. I want to thank my 3 guests here on the podium for taking the time to coming here, for engaging in the debate. I want to thank you as the audience for listening, for contributing. I, of course, also want to thank the team behind the scenes and the technical staff for making this possible. If you are here for the International Week, I think 1 floor down, there will be some food waiting for you for the next, before the evening. And you are very warmly invited to also give us some feedback on tonight's session. There should be paper forms lying around, and there's also a QR code that might appear on screen as I speak. So if you have feedback for us, we're happy to hear from you. And yes, I think that's all I have to say for now. Thank you again, and I wish you all a nice rest of the evening.